My daughter-in-law leaned close to my son and hissed, "Kick your mother out. She's useless." Her words cut through me like a knife. But worse than her cruelty was my son's silence. My boy, the one I raised with every ounce of strength I had, stood still. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to their laughter drift through the walls. The house I had built with my late husband's sweat and sacrifice no longer felt like mine. I realized I was a guest, unwanted, disposable. The next morning, I quietly packed my suitcase. A few clothes, my Bible, and a faded photo of Robert. That was all. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. My back was straight, my face calm, though inside my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. As I stood at the doorway, I heard her laughing in the kitchen. "She'll never come back," she told my son. "She's gone for good." I will. If you were in my place, would you leave quietly or confront them? Share your answer in the comments. I'd love to know what you'd do. With each step away from the house, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But what she didn't know was that her cruelty wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. And soon, her words would become the very chains that dragged her down. The room I rented was nothing more than a box with a bed and a small window. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor creaked, and at night, the sound of cars on the street below drowned out my thoughts. Still, it was mine, and no one could tell me I wasn't welcome there. I told myself that was enough. But as the days stretched on, loneliness became a second skin. The first blow didn't come from my son or even my daughter-in-law. It came from the people I had known for years, the neighbors who had once borrowed sugar from me, who had complimented my garden, who had eaten at my table during holidays. On my second morning away from home, I walked to the market. A group of women stood by the fruit stall, their voices lowered but not enough to escape my ears. "She must have been impossible to live with," one whispered. "Otherwise, why would her own son send her away?" Another sighed. "I always thought she was a bit controlling. Maybe it finally caught up to her." I froze, the apples in my hand slipping slightly. I wanted to shout that they were wrong, that I had never asked for more than a place at my own table. But my throat tightened. I walked away without buying anything. Later, at church, the whispers followed me. An elderly man, well-meaning but careless, approached me after service. "It's a shame," he said, patting my hand. "But perhaps it's time to think about a nursing home. You know, to make things easier for the young couple." I smiled faintly, though inside I was trembling. "Thank you for your concern," I murmured, and walked away. Each comment, each sideways glance, was another stone on my chest. My daughter-in-law had succeeded in more than just pushing me out of the house. She had rewritten the story. To the world, I wasn't a mother betrayed. I was a burden discarded. One afternoon, I passed by my old street, unable to resist. 2 women were chatting at the gate of the house next door. When they spotted me, their voices dropped, but not low enough. "Look at her," one muttered. "Still clinging around. Doesn't she realize it's over?" I kept walking, my head high, though my stomach churned. At night, alone in my small room, I replayed those words. I thought of Robert, of how he had always told me to hold my dignity above all else. But what dignity was left when people believed I was cast out because I was unbearable? I wanted to vanish. But then I remembered the laughter in the kitchen that last morning, the smug tone of her voice as she declared I was gone for good. That memory reignited the spark inside me. No, I wouldn't vanish. Not yet. I started listening more carefully, piecing together the fragments of what people were saying. My daughter-in-law was not only mocking me behind closed doors, she was boasting about her victory in public. Mrs. Carter, my longtime neighbor, came to visit me one evening. She set down a basket of bread and shook her head. "She's been running her mouth again," she said. At the market, she told anyone who would listen that she's the real head of the family now. She said you begged to stay, and that your son finally grew a spine and threw you out. My hands tightened on the basket. "She said that?" Mrs. Carter nodded grimly, loud and clear. People laughed. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one contradicted her. I thanked her, my voice calm, though my chest burned. That night, I opened a small notebook and began to write. Date, place, words. Not gossip, not assumptions, facts. Her cruelty recorded in ink. The humiliation didn't stop there. At another gathering I was not invited to, she reportedly clinked her glass and announced, "Finally, the house is mine. No more old woman meddling in my marriage." When I heard about it later, I closed my notebook and whispered to myself, "Every word you speak is another rope you wrap around your neck." Still, the pain of being misunderstood lingered. One day, a younger neighbor, barely out of her teens, stopped me in the street. "Is it true?" she asked, eyes wide. "Did you really fight with her and refuse to leave until he forced you?" I looked at the girl, startled. "Is that what she told you?" The girl shrugged. "Everyone says you were difficult, that you didn't want to let go of the house." For a moment, my voice caught in my throat. Then I steadied myself. "One day," I said softly, "you'll learn that not everything people say is true." She blushed and looked away, but the damage was done. Another seed of doubt had been planted in the community's mind. The weight of their judgment pressed on me daily, but slowly, something shifted. Their whispers no longer broke me, they hardened me. I began to see clearly. Her arrogance was not just cruelty, it was carelessness, and carelessness always leaves cracks. She believed she had won, that she had rewritten the story forever. But stories have a way of unraveling when the truth is patient. So I endured the sideways glances. I bore the pitying smiles. I let them think I was weak, cast aside, useless. Because the longer they believed her version, the more shocking the truth would be when it finally came out. And I promised myself this: I would not raise my voice. I would not scream or beg. I would let her own arrogance destroy her. The day would come when the very people who whispered against me would see her as she truly was, and when that day arrived, no one would ever mistake me for useless again. Weeks slipped by, and from my little rented room, I kept hearing new stories. My daughter-in-law was growing bolder with every passing day. With me gone, she strutted like a queen, filling the silence with her own version of the truth. She told anyone who would listen that she had finally restored order in the family. She painted herself as the savior who rescued my son from the burden of his old mother. I became a cautionary tale in her, retelling a woman too stubborn to step aside, too blind to see her time had passed. But arrogance is a dangerous fuel. The more she fed on it, the more reckless she became, and recklessness leaves openings. It started at a birthday party for one of my cousins. I hadn't been invited, of course, but many of my relatives attended. Later, one of them called me, his voice heavy with dismay. She said it openly, right at the table. "He told me. She bragged that she forced your son to choose between you and her. She said you begged to stay, and that he finally grew up when he pushed you out." Everyone was shocked. No one said a word, but we all heard it. I closed my eyes, my jaw tightening. Another piece of evidence, another voice to confirm what I already knew. The next time I saw my cousin in person, he placed a hand on mine. "I didn't defend you then," he admitted, shame flickering in his eyes. "But if the time comes, I will." That was the first time I realized I wouldn't need to stand alone. Not long after, I had my own chance to hear her arrogance with my own ears. It happened at a neighborhood dinner. I had been invited quietly by an old friend, who assured me it would be a large gathering, that I could blend into the crowd without drawing attention. I went, dressed modestly, keeping to the edges of the room. She arrived late, as she often did, in a flash of color and perfume. My son trailed behind her, looking weary. She took her place at the center of the group, her voice rising above the chatter as though the room belonged to her. "You wouldn't believe how much easier life is now," she declared, lifting her glass. "The house finally feels like mine. No more constant interference. No more old woman shuffling around, acting like she's still in charge." Laughter rippled through the group, though some faces looked uneasy. I stayed hidden in the back, my heart pounding. She continued, emboldened by her own performance. "I told him, plain and simple, choose me or her. And you see who he chose. That's how I knew I had won." My fingers trembled around the phone in my pocket. Slowly, carefully, I pressed the record button. Her voice, dripping with smugness, filled the tiny speaker. Every word another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. But fate gave me an even sharper weapon. Because she didn't stop there. She leaned toward her circle of admirers and added, "She cried, you know, she begged. But I told him she was useless, that she had nothing left to give, and I was right." Look at us now." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. People shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Then, from the far side of the table, a voice cut through the tension. It was Mr. Harlan, one of the most respected men in our community, a widower in his 70s who had known Robert and me for decades. His words were calm but firm. "That's nothing to boast about, young lady. A man who forgets his mother has forgotten the very hands that raised him." Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. She forced a laugh, brushing him off. "Oh, Mr. Harlan, you don't understand. Times are different now. She was just in the way." "Oh, Ray." He said nothing more, but the disappointment in his eyes said enough. And I knew then I had both a recording and a witness whose word carried weight. When I returned home that night, I sat on my narrow bed and replayed the recording. Her voice filled the room. She cried, she begged. I told him she was useless. I wrote the date in my notebook, the names of those who had been present, and underlined one line: Harlan equals witness. The pieces were falling into place. Not only did I have her words on tape, I had people of standing who could confirm them. And the more she bragged, the more people began to turn. I noticed it in the way neighbors' smiles grew tighter around her, the way conversations stalled when she joined. Some still laughed at her stories, but others frowned, disturbed by her pride. She didn't see it. She was too blinded by her own reflection, too drunk on the sound of her own voice. But I saw it. I saw the cracks spreading across the perfect mask she wore. And I waited, patiently, silently, for the day it would shatter. Because now, I no longer felt powerless. I no longer felt like the discarded woman packing a suitcase in shame. I held a weapon she could never take back, her own words. Words that had humiliated me once, but would soon humiliate her before everyone who mattered. The recording on my phone became a secret I carried like a talisman. Whenever I felt the sting of gossip or the ache of loneliness, I would play it back softly, hearing her arrogance in her own voice. Each cruel word reminded me that I wasn't imagining things, that I hadn't deserved the humiliation. But what strengthened me even more were the witnesses. Mr. Harlan's disappointment at that dinner had been plain, and word traveled quickly. Others who had heard her boasting began to speak quietly to me, almost as if confessing. At the bakery one morning, a woman I had known for years leaned across the counter. "I shouldn't repeat this," she whispered, "but at the market last week, she said you were pathetic, that you begged your son not to throw you out." She laughed, saying she felt like a queen finally getting rid of her servant. The woman shook her head, disgusted. I don't know how she can say such things out loud. I thanked her, tucking the words away like another brick in the wall I was building. Later, at a community fundraiser, my cousin approached me quietly. "She's at it again," he said. "Told everyone you were jealous of her, that you always wanted to control your son. She claimed she freed him by making him choose." His eyes darkened. People didn't laugh this time. They looked uncomfortable. Every story, every repetition, widened the circle of people who knew what she was truly like. She didn't realize it, but she was digging her own grave one word at a time. Then came the moment that cemented everything. I had gone to church one Sunday, determined to hold my head high. After service, people mingled outside, chatting in small groups. She, of course, was surrounded by her usual admirers. I tried to slip past unnoticed, but her voice carried above the rest. "It's peaceful now," she said loudly, without the old woman meddling. I told him either she goes or I do. And he finally listened. Best decision he ever made. Her words cut through the chatter like a knife. The group fell silent, and standing right there, within earshot, was Mrs. Langford, one of the most respected elders of our congregation. Mrs. Langford fixed her with a sharp gaze. "You speak with pride about something that should shame you," she said sternly. "A son who forgets his mother will one day be forgotten himself." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law's smile froze, but she quickly tried to laugh it off. "Oh, Mrs. Langford, you take everything so seriously. It was just a joke." But the elder's eyes didn't waver. Cruelty is never a joke. The group dispersed awkwardly, leaving her standing alone. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. Anger flared in her eyes, but beneath it was something else, fear. She had finally realized that her words carried consequences. That night, I added to my notebook. Date, Sunday, Place, churchyard. Witness, Mrs. Langford. I closed the book and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not only did I have her voice recorded, I had respected members of the community ready to stand as witnesses if needed. She had mocked me publicly, and now she could not take those words back. Meanwhile, whispers began to change direction. Where once I had been the subject of pity and misunderstanding, now the tide was turning. People approached me with gentler voices, apologetic eyes. They began to see me not as a burden, but as a woman wronged. One neighbor confessed, "At first I believed her. I thought maybe you were too demanding. But after hearing her laugh about it so many times, I see now. She was the problem, not you." Vindication is a quiet thing. It doesn't come with applause. It comes in the subtle shift of how people look at you, the softening of their words, the respect returning to their eyes. And still, I said nothing. I didn't confront her. I didn't spread stories of my own. I simply let her voice, her arrogance, and her cruelty build the case against her. I knew the day was coming when the truth would need to be spoken aloud. And what better day than the one when the entire family, extended relatives, and community friends gathered to honor Robert's birthday. She insisted on hosting, of course. She wanted to shine, to prove again that she was the lady of the house. She didn't realize she was building the stage for her own humiliation. I prepared in silence. I polished my shoes, pressed my navy dress, and slipped my notebook and phone into my bag. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to demand. I was going to let her words recorded and remembered speak for themselves. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in what you say, but in what you let others hear. And soon, the whole family would hear. Robert's birthday arrived on a crisp autumn evening. It had always been a day of warmth, a gathering where family and neighbors came together to honor the man who had held us all together with his quiet strength. This year, the air felt different, charged, expectant. My daughter-in-law had volunteered to host, eager to prove herself as the new center of the family. She saw it as her coronation. I saw it as her reckoning. The house gleamed when I arrived. Candles flickered on polished tables. The aroma of roasted meat and sweet pies drifted through the air, and laughter spilled from the dining room. I stepped through the door, dressed simply, but with dignity, navy dress, pearl earrings, and a calm smile. The conversations hushed for a moment. Some guests nodded respectfully. Others looked uncertain, as though my presence was an unexpected complication. My son froze when his eyes met mine. He looked away quickly, guilt shadowing his face. She greeted me with a strained smile. "Well, you made it," she said, her voice brittle. "Of course," I answered smoothly. "It's Robert's day. I wouldn't miss it." Dinner began, and plates clattered as food was passed around. She sat at the head of the table, basking in the role she had stolen, her laughter rising above the others like a trumpet. My son sat stiffly beside her, his eyes darting nervously from guest to guest. For most of the meal, I remained quiet. I listened, I observed, and I waited. The moment would come, and it did when dessert was served. She tapped her spoon against her glass, rising to her feet. "I just want to say how honored I am to host tonight," she announced, her voice dripping with pride. "Robert built a strong family, and I'm proud to continue his traditions. It hasn't been easy stepping into this role, but sometimes hard choices must be made for the good of the household." The words hung in the air. Everyone knew what she meant. My chest tightened, but my face remained calm. I rose slowly. "May I say something?" All eyes turned to me. She froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a gracious smile. "Of course," she said sweetly, though her knuckles whitened around the glass she held. I rested my hands lightly on the table. "Tonight we honor Robert, a man who valued truth, respect, and family. But I can't sit here and let his memory be twisted into a stage for pride." "You speak of hard choices," I said, turning toward her. "Shall we remind everyone what those choices sounded like?" A murmur rippled across the table. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled my phone from my bag and held it up. "I think you do." I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, unmistakable and venomous. I told him, "Either she goes or I do." The old woman begged to stay, but I told him she was useless, and now we're finally free. Gasps erupted. A fork clattered to the table. My son's face drained of color. Guests shifted, some staring at her in shock, others turning toward me with wide eyes. She jumped to her feet, her voice shrill. "That's taken out of context. She's twisting it." Before she could finish, Mrs. Langford's steady voice cut across the table. "I heard you say those very words outside the church. Cruelty is never a joke." Mr. Harlan added, his tone grave. "And I heard you at dinner weeks ago. You mocked her openly. Don't pretend now." A murmur swelled into voices rising on every side. "She told me the same at the market," one cousin exclaimed. "Yes, and at the fundraiser," another chimed in. "She bragged about forcing him to choose." The room was no longer a dining hall, it was a courtroom. Every word from the witnesses was another piece of evidence laid bare. My daughter-in-law's face turned crimson. She stammered, "You don't understand. She was always meddling. I had no choice." "Enough, Mrs." Carter snapped from the end of the table. "I've known her for 30 years. I know meddling when I see it. What I saw was a woman sacrificing everything for her family, only to be thrown out." The room erupted, voices overlapping. Some slammed their fists on the table in anger, others shook their heads in disbelief. My son buried his face in his hands, trembling. I raised my voice just enough to be heard over the clamor. "Context?" I asked softly. "What context makes those words acceptable? What context justifies mocking a mother who raised her son with everything she had?" Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating silence. I turned to my son. "And you? Do you remember your silence when she told you to cast me out?" That silence cut deeper than her words. "Tonight, you must decide if that silence is who you are." His shoulders shook. Tears welled in his eyes. But he said nothing. I straightened, my voice calm but sharp. "I didn't come here for pity. I didn't come here for revenge through possessions. I came here because Robert believed in truth. And the truth is this: no one who destroys family with arrogance and cruelty deserves respect." The room broke again, not into applause, but into murmurs of agreement. "She's right," someone whispered. "Disgraceful," another muttered. Several guests rose from their seats, pushing their chairs back, unwilling to remain at the same table as her. She sank down, her hands trembling, her face twisted with desperation. "You don't understand. She always wanted to control him. I only—" "Stop!" Mr. Harlan's voice thundered. "Every word digs your hole deeper. We've heard enough." My daughter-in-law collapsed into her chair, sobbing. My son sat motionless beside her, the weight of shame heavy on his shoulders. I gathered my bag, my phone safely tucked away, and looked around the table. "Thank you for listening," I said quietly. "That is all I came to say." And with that, I walked out, not in defeat as I once had, but in triumph. Behind me, the voices rose again, some scolding her, others comforting my son, but no one defending her. Her coronation had turned into her trial, and in front of everyone who mattered, she had been found guilty by her own words. The echoes of that night carried long after I walked out of the dining room. What began as a birthday gathering for Robert had ended as a courtroom trial, with my daughter-in-law in the defendant's seat. I didn't need to stay to see the fallout. It came back to me in fragments from relatives, neighbors, and even my own son. They told me how she had tried, in desperation, to claw her way out of the pit she had dug for herself. She kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding. One cousin recounted over the phone. But no one believed her. You could see it in everyone's eyes. The recording, the witnesses. She couldn't argue her way out. Another neighbor told me. "She raised her voice, saying you exaggerated, but the more she spoke, the more foolish she sounded." People shook their heads. Some even left the table rather than listen to her excuses. And free. My daughter-in-law, once so confident in her charm, had become frantic. She pointed fingers, her voice cracking under pressure. "She's always meddling," she shouted, according to those who stayed behind. "She never let us live our lives. I had no choice." But every attempt to deflect landed like another blow against her. Her accusations sounded hollow against the weight of her own words, recorded and repeated by people who had heard them firsthand. Mrs. Langford, the elder from church, cut her down with quiet authority. "I stood there myself when you bragged about casting her out. Do not insult us by denying it now." Even Mr. Harlan, who rarely spoke in anger, slammed his palm against the table. "Respect is not won by tearing others down. You have disgraced yourself tonight." The room had turned against her completely. Where once she commanded attention, now she was an object of pity at best, scorn at worst. And my son? He sat in silence. They said he looked like a man aged 10 years in an hour. His hands shook, his eyes red, but no words left his lips. His silence, once my deepest wound, had become his own prison. In the days that followed, her humiliation spread like wildfire. People talked, as people always do. The recording was replayed on phones in kitchens and living rooms, her arrogant words echoing again and again until no one could deny who she truly was. At church the following Sunday, she tried to hold her head high. She wore a bright dress, her hair styled perfectly, her lips painted in a bold shade of red. But appearances couldn't cover shame. Conversations stilled when she approached. Eyes turned away. People offered polite nods, nothing more. I watched from my pew, calm and steady. When she turned and saw me, her painted smile faltered. She quickly looked away, her posture stiff. Later, neighbors told me of the dinners she attempted to host, desperate to reclaim her throne. Invitations were declined. Those who did come sat stiffly, offering short answers, their eyes filled with judgment rather than admiration. Her table, once full of laughter, had become a place of unease. And behind closed doors, her mask cracked further. The walls of their home could not contain the fights. Neighbors reported hearing her shouting, her voice shrill with desperation. "You should have defended me. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone." My son's voice was lower, quieter. Sometimes it was nothing at all. That silence, which had once wounded me, was now her torment. I did not celebrate her misery. I did not gloat. Instead, I lived quietly, tending to my plants, sipping tea by my window, writing in my notebook. I knew her downfall didn't need my hand anymore. It was unfolding naturally, inevitable as the turning of seasons. What struck me most was how quickly respect shifted. Once, people had pitied me and admired her. Now, they looked at me with respect restored, and at her with thinly veiled contempt. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had tried to erase me from the family, to silence me. Instead, she had erased herself from the community's respect, while I stood taller than ever without raising my voice. And though the battle wasn't over, the scales had tipped. She was no longer the queen of the house. She was a woman exposed, stripped of her illusions, scrambling to salvage a dignity she had thrown away with her own hands. For me, that was enough for now. But I knew the story wasn't finished. Because humiliation, once it begins, doesn't stop easily. It seeps into every corner of a life, reminding you at every turn of what you've lost. And hers had only just begun. Humiliation might have silenced some, but not her. My daughter-in-law wasn't built to accept shame quietly. Instead, she fought against it, clawing at the edges of her collapsing world, desperate to patch the cracks. But the more she tried, the faster it all came apart. Relatives told me later that, after I left the gathering, she refused to let the night end. She stood trembling at the head of the table, her voice cracking as she tried to command authority. "She's lying to you," she cried, pointing toward the door I had walked through. "She's always twisted things to make herself the victim. Don't you see? She wanted to control him forever. She couldn't let us live in peace." But no one nodded. No one agreed. The more she spoke, the more frantic she sounded. One cousin challenged her directly. "Control? That woman worked 2 jobs to keep your husband fed and clothed. She never asked for a thing in return. And this is how you repay her?" Faces around the table hardened. Some relatives exchanged looks of disgust. My son sat slumped in his chair, saying nothing, his silence a louder condemnation than any words. But she didn't stop. Desperation drove her to lash out in every direction. "You don't understand," she snapped. "She always interfered. She treated me like a stranger in my own home. She never respected me as his wife." Someone else cut in. "Respect is earned. What respect have you shown?" Her mask cracked further. The smooth charm she once used so easily had disintegrated. Now her words tumbled out sharp and bitter. She turned on my son next. "And you?" she shouted, her fingers stabbing the air at him. "Don't think you're innocent. You chose me. You told me you wanted me to have the final say. You let me fight your battles for you. Don't you dare sit there and act ashamed now." Gasps echoed around the room. My son buried his face in his hands. The shame he carried was now dragged into the open, not by me, but by the very woman who claimed to love him. Still, she wasn't finished. Her anger spiraled, reckless, uncontrollable. "I don't care what any of you think," she spat. "I didn't marry him for his mother. I didn't marry him for all of you. I married him for what he could give me, for the house, the life, the freedom. And I got it. That's all that matters." The words struck the room like lightning. Silence followed, sharp, heavy, suffocating. The final mask had been ripped away. Even those who had stayed quiet until then looked at her with open horror. My cousin told me later, it was like the air was sucked out of the room. No one could believe she said it, but she did, and she meant it. From that moment, there was no saving her. No excuse could erase the selfishness dripping from her confession. She had stripped herself bare, and what lay beneath was ugly enough to destroy whatever fragile respect she had left. Neighbors spread the story within hours. She admitted it herself, they whispered. She married for the house, not for love. By the next day, it wasn't just family who judged her, it was the entire community. At church, people avoided her not out of politeness, but out of disgust. Invitations stopped. Her name was spoken only in whispers, always with a shake of the head. She became the cautionary tale she had once tried to make me, the woman who boasted too loudly, revealed too much, and lost everything. And I didn't lift a finger. All I had done was stand calmly, let her own words speak, and walk away. She had done the rest herself. For me, that was the truest form of justice. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need revenge written in fire. She burned her own house down, brick by brick, word by word. And as she sat in the ashes, clutching the hollow crown she had once worn so proudly, I found myself free not of her cruelty, but of the weight she had tried to put on my shoulders. The truth had spoken. And it had spoken louder than she ever could. In the weeks that followed her collapse, the whispers never stopped. They traveled through the neighborhood, spilled across pews at church, and floated in the aisles of the market. Everyone knew what she had said. Everyone knew the truth now. I didn't need to add a word. I went about my days quietly, tending to my plants by the window, reading my Bible, and sipping tea as the sun rose. I no longer felt like the discarded woman who left her house in tears. I felt steady, whole, unshaken. The community's eyes changed, too. Where once they had looked at me with suspicion or pity, now they looked with respect. They stopped me in the street to squeeze my hand, to say they admired how I carried myself. "You didn't need to scream," one woman said softly. "You let the truth speak. That's strength." Meanwhile, she withdrew further into herself. The dinners stopped. The laughter stopped. Even her bright clothes and sharp lipstick couldn't mask the shame etched into her face. When she walked into a room, conversations quieted. When she tried to speak, people turned away. She had been silenced, not by me, but by her own arrogance. My son suffered most of all. His silence had once been my deepest wound, but now it was his burden. He came to visit me more often, shoulders slumped, eyes heavy. Sometimes he sat at my small kitchen table without speaking at all, just staring at his hands. Other times he tried to bridge the gap with small kindnesses, fixing a leaky faucet, bringing groceries, asking if I needed anything. One evening, as dusk settled and the light through the curtains glowed gold, he broke down completely. He dropped to his knees on my kitchen floor, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracked with guilt. "I was wrong. I should have defended you. I let her words replace my own. I betrayed you when you needed me most. Please, please forgive me." I looked at him, my heart heavy. For years I had carried him, defended him, sacrificed for him. And when it mattered most, he had chosen silence. His tears blurred my vision, but I did not speak. I reached for my teacup, lifted it slowly, and took a sip. My silence was not anger, but clarity. Forgiveness could not be begged for in a single night. Trust could not be rebuilt with tears alone. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking, the room filled with the sound of his sobs. I let the silence linger. Because silence, I had learned, could be more powerful than words. Later that night, when he left, he kissed my hand gently. His tears stained my skin, but I said nothing. I watched him go, and I prayed quietly for the strength to let time, not guilt, write the rest of his story. As for her, she remained locked in the prison of her own making. No one needed to scold her anymore. The community's coldness was punishment enough. She had wanted to wear the crown of respect. Instead, she wore the weight of disgrace, heavy and unshakable. I sat by my window that evening, the last rays of sunlight painting the room in warm hues. I whispered softly, not for anyone to hear but for myself. I am not useless. I never was. The words filled the air like a benediction, washing away the sting of every insult, every moment of doubt. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in taking everything from those who wronged you. It isn't in shouting or striking back. The sweetest revenge is patience, letting them destroy themselves with their own arrogance, while you rise quietly, stronger than before. And as I watched the first stars flicker in the darkening sky, I felt Robert's presence beside me, steady and proud. I had not needed to fight with anger. I had fought with truth, and truth had won.